Hello, I'm Scott Wipperman, the pastor here at First Presbyterian Church. And no matter who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, know that you're welcome here. We hope you enjoy today's service on this video, and we invite you to come join us for worship anytime that you would like, or to join in any of the other activities of the church. For more information about First Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at fpchelena.com or call us at 442-4775. God bless. And our gospel reading today comes from the Gospel of John, the second chapter. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear women, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best until now." This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed at Cana in the Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. The word of the Lord. When my daughter, Mallory, was about 8 or 9, she did something wrong. And so I sat her down and I explained to her what she had done and explained why it was wrong. And we talked about what some better courses of action would have been, and then why those would have been better courses of action. And when I got done, she relayed to me that both I and her biological father punish her the same way. We talk her to death. But she at least did pay me a backhanded compliment and said, "At least you don't say the same thing over and over and over again." I think I might have learned from Isaiah. Because Isaiah tells us in the beginning here that he will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet. What is it that Isaiah is not remaining quiet about? What is it that he's going to keep talking about over and over? And he says he's going to keep talking until the city, till the people shine like the new dawn, till God's glory shines through them. Now, this could be an admonishment. It could be that, okay, you guys aren't doing your good stuff yet. You're not shining like the Lord tells you should. You're not following the Lord. People call this place desolate. They call it deserted. Or he could have been trying to lift them up, to paint a vision for what will be. You see, this part of Isaiah is frequently what's referred to as Isaiah 3. Many Bible scholars think there's 3 parts to Isaiah. The book covers a long period of time. In the first part of Isaiah, it's before the exile to Babylon. And Isaiah is there warning the people to get on the right path because they're headed in the wrong direction. And second, Isaiah deals while the people are in exile in Babylon. In second Isaiah there is trying to build up the people, trying to assure them that God cares about them and that God is, in fact, more powerful than Marduk and Bezo, some of the idols of the time. He makes a little fun of them, saying they're just wooden or stone idols that have to be moved from place to place, and they cannot speak of themselves. But then the Persians come and overtake Babylon and send the Israelites back home to Egypt. And this is 3rd Isaiah, when they've made this journey from Babylon back to Isaiah, and they're trying to reestablish their land, their people. And things aren't going as well as they'd hoped. There was obviously excitement on the way to returning. They're coming back on this road, made plain, made straight for the followers to fall on. And while they have completed the physical journey, they're just beginning their metaphorical journey. These times are tough, and they're beginning to wonder again, like they did back in Babylon, are God's hands too short to reach us and help us? Is God's ears too dull to hear our cries? And so Isaiah here comes about and, yes, on one hand admonishes them that your hard work and your faith are instruments of God bringing about His will. And he, at the same time, is painting a picture, repainting a picture for them of them as this shining city, spreading God's glory all over the world, showing it to their faces, revealing it to their hearts. And so Isaiah won't shut up. He keeps talking. He's going to keep talking about their wonder, God's glory, until they believe. He's going to talk them to death. And then we get to Paul. Paul talking to the Corinthians. And he has some things to tell them about what's going on. Now, I think that Paul had paid attention to some of the people. Nowadays, if you're a speaker or if you're an author, there's all kinds of material, some books, some help courses, seminars, things like Toastmasters that will teach you that if you want to really be effective, you need to engage your audience from the very beginning. You've got to open with something that just grabs them by and has them paying great attention to what you want to say. And so Paul, having been to one of these seminars, starts with, I don't want you to be ignorant. That's got you, right? That's a good opening. It's got my attention. May not have my goodwill, but it's got my attention. He just called me ignorant. And then he goes on to follow this, that you were fools. Someone deceived you to believing in these mute idols. I think he's just making things worse here. But he goes on, seeming completely oblivious to the fact that our blood pressure at this point in time is rising a little bit, and goes on to explain to us about gifts. That the Spirit gives out gifts as the Spirit desires to give out those gifts. And that all gifts come from the Spirit. And the Spirit decides who will get which gift. He tells us that we are to look and see which of these gifts we've been blessed with. Some of us have been blessed with certain gifts, but none of us have been blessed with all the gifts. The Spirit decides who is going to get which gift. And none of us have them all. Some of us, like Charlotte, have been given the gifts of musical finesse. And God gave me the gift of musical muddlement. But we have been given these gifts by our Creator, chosen for us specifically. And then he gets to the part where he doesn't want us to be ignorant. The main part of what he has to say here, that these gifts were given for the common good. These gifts were not given to make us rich. These gifts were not given to make us famous. These gifts were not given to make people like us. These gifts were not given for us to be comfortable. These gifts were given to us that we might use them for all people, for the common good. That we each have some gifts, and we come together in this family of faith. We come together in this wider community, and we put our gifts together for the good of all people. That's what these gifts are for. Do not be ignorant. Do not be fooled. This is why you have these gifts, to be used for the betterment of all. And then we get to John. Now, John's gospel is kind of interesting. John doesn't talk about as many miracles in his gospel as are relayed in the other three synoptic gospels. But he opens here with a miracle right near the beginning of his gospel. And it's interesting, this is a miracle that appears only in John. And it's a great story, isn't it? It's one we could hear over and over again. A great narration of an event at a wedding where there's impending disaster, impending catastrophe, and it is averted. That Jesus' mother, which is interesting in John, Jesus' mother is never called Mary. She's always called Jesus' mother or the woman. But Jesus' mother, Mary, comes to Jesus at this wedding and says, "The wine has given out." And Jesus replies, "So? Ain't my problem. Why are you involving me in this? It's not my time yet." But she turns to the to the servants and says, "Do what he says." And the story goes on, and the wedding is saved, and it's a wonderful event. Now, we can look at this story just as that simple narration, as this wonderful story. You can understand this story literally, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the only way we look at this, we miss all of the symbolism that John has placed in this story. It's all over the place here. Jesus' mother, Mary, says, "I want you to solve this problem." And Jesus says, "It's not my time yet." What John is telling us here is that Jesus is very attuned to the fact that he can do only what the Father wills him to do. We celebrated the Epiphany a couple Sundays ago of the wise men coming and realizing that Jesus is God incarnate here on earth. But his final epiphany will be when he raises from the grave and rises up to heaven and shows us that he's conquered death. And he realizes that everything between these two events has to be the will of God. And so he's protesting that it's not his time yet. The message is, I have to follow the will of God. And then, as I said, Mary turns to the servants and says, "Do whatever he says." Now, this is kind of interesting. Mary is not the head of this household. And Mary is a woman in a very patriarchal society. And yet here she is basically ordering the servants to do something, ordering the servants over whom she has no authority to do something. And they pay attention. And what is it that she orders them to do? What is it she tells them to do? Do whatever he says. And this is not just a message to those servants. This is Mary proclaiming this. This is Mary understanding the very power of Jesus Christ, proclaiming this to all people of all times. Do whatever Jesus says. And the servants go and fill these stone vessels. Now it's interesting. It specifies that they're stone vessels, not pottery. And that's because pottery is porous. And so if you put something in a piece of pottery that hasn't been glazed, it will absorb some of that. And it makes it very hard to clean it for holding water for purification. So water for purification was normally kept in stone jars, non-porous jars. That way it could be clean and pure. And these was used frequently because you would have travelers coming with dusty hands and dusty feet from walking on the road, and you would use this water to purify them, to clean them, as an honor to them as being your guests. Now, I don't think the number of jars, which is 6, which is kind of one less than that nice number 7, or the size of the jars was overly important to John. I think what John is getting here is that these jars that contained water for purification have just been replaced with a new purification, with wine for our purification. There's a change in the epoch here, the epoch of the current wedding ceremony where you're cleansed with water, in the epoch of Christ's words to come where we are cleansed with this wine. And you might remember that later in the story, the master of ceremonies tastes this wine and proclaims that it is better, that this purification is the better purification, is where John is symbolically leading us to. And then the servants take some of this water out of these jars and takes it to the master of ceremonies at the bequest of Jesus. Now, we don't know when the servants realized that this water turned into wine. It's not clear in the story. There's no hocus pocus that Jesus does. There's no flash of light. There's no wand that he waves. He just tells the servants to fill these vessels to the top, and then immediately tells them to take some and take it to the master of ceremonies. And what we don't know is, did the servants realize this water had become wine? Maybe the color changed and they could see that something had happened to this. Or maybe it wasn't clear to them. And they're taking this ladle full of wine over to the master of ceremonies and kind of pouring it out at an arm's length because they're telling them this is wine, but they know it was just water a second ago, and who knows what's going to happen. Jesus here is showing us, or John here is showing us through his symbolism, making a connection to a later story of Christ offering the living water to the Samaritan woman. The mystery that changed this water into wine is foreshadowed here as the mystery of the living water that brings us eternal life. John is laying out for us what will come. That this wine that Jesus made is new life, is life eternal, is the blessed wine, life to come. And then the master of ceremonies tastes the wine and proclaims it good and serves it to all, and the party goes on. But what do you think would have happened if the revelers at this wedding had found out about how this wine came to be? What would have happened if it had become common knowledge that this was just water a second ago, but this man over here turned it into wine? And John solves this problem because the only people who know what happened to this wine are Jesus, his mother, the disciples, and a couple servants. And so it stays quiet and a mystery. There's an author that talks about this, and he speaks that, I'm sorry, I'm not finding the quote here right off the top of my head. But he says that the master of this ceremony, the master of this symphony, works in strange ways. The master of the symphony being God. That sometimes God is forceful and sometimes God is very quiet and subtle. Sometimes God moves with big moves, and sometimes he moves with simple little actions. Sometimes God shakes the earth, and sometimes it's very subtle what God is up to and how he moves forward. And that, look at this. The disciples saw Jesus turn the water into wine, and they believed in him. Their world has just been transformed. They now view this person as someone other than a wise teacher. They see this person for who he is, for God incarnate. And their world has been forever changed, and yet the party's just going on around them like nothing else has happened. More wine has been brought forward. And isn't that the case in our transformations? When Christ transforms us, comes into our lives, makes us a new life, and when we see through God's eyes this world for the first time, everything is different, but nothing has changed outside. Nothing has changed for the moment, but it will change as we walk through this earth with new eyes, following God's ways, following the life of Christ. Now, John, unlike Isaiah, who's going to keep talking until you're tired of it, and unlike Paul, who pronounces you idiots and fools to get your attention, John is very subtle. He has a symbolism in here, but he never says, "Did you get it? Did you figure out what I was talking about here?" No, he just kind of drops little breadcrumbs here and there with the hope that we'll notice these breadcrumbs and see where they're leading us. He approaches this from a very different point of view than Isaiah and Paul did. So from Isaiah saying, "I'm going to tell you the truth until you're tired of me telling you this. I'm going to tell you about this wonderful vision of what God is doing here in this world," to Paul telling you, "Don't be ignorant. Don't think these gifts are for your good. They're for the common good." To John, laying out all these crumbs, leading us to the wonders of Christ and this transformed life that we're drawn into and how it will change us forever, how we will be different people, and yet the world will just go on. Listen to these people. Listen to the different ways they talk to us and speak to us, and follow what they said. Remember Mary. Do what he tells you. Amen.